What happens when two powerful nations, so deeply intertwined, find themselves at odds over trade, energy, and policy? How do the decisions made by leaders across the border impact your daily life? From the price of gasoline to the stability of your electricity grid. The relationship between Canada and the United States is a delicate balancing act, one that affects millions, from factory workers to homeowners. Yet, as tensions over energy exports and trade policies rise, this once steadfast partnership is increasingly resembling a high-stakes game of chess. Canada and the United States share an energy relationship that is critical for the well-being of both nations. Canada is the US's largest electricity supplier. It's providing nearly 100% of the electricity the US imports. While this might seem like a relatively small percentage of the total US electricity consumption, only about 1% to 2%, it has significant implications for certain states. For instance, New York relies on Canada for about 25% of its electricity, mainly sourced from hydropower generated in Quebec and Ontario. States like Minnesota and Michigan are similarly dependent on Canadian energy. Minnesota imports 90% of its electricity from Manitoba Hydro, while Michigan sources 95% from Ontario. This electricity isn't just powering homes, it's vital for factories, hospitals, and public transportation systems. If Canada were to reduce its energy exports, states like New York could face power shortages, leading to rising electricity costs during extreme weather events, such as heat waves or polar vortexes. These events, when power demand surges, could push up electricity bills for households and businesses. So, why would Canada consider restricting electricity exports? It's a response to U.S. trade policies, especially those that have targeted Canadian industries, like the 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum imposed in 2023. In retaliation, Canada could use its energy exports as leverage in these negotiations, highlighting how deeply interconnected the two economies truly are. While electricity is a key issue, oil is where the real tension lies. The U.S. imports around 3.8 million barrels of oil per day from Canada, enough to fill 240 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day. This accounts for more than 50% of the total U.S. crude oil imports, making Canada the largest foreign oil supplier to the United States. The oil is transported through major pipelines, such as Enbridge's Line 5 and the Keystone Pipeline, both of which have been the subject of protests and legal challenges. If Canada were to restrict these oil exports, the ripple effects would be felt immediately. Gas prices in the U.S. could spike by $5 per gallon, depending on the severity of supply chain disruptions. A truck driver filling a 100-gallon tank could see an increase of $50 to $100 per trip. Similarly, airlines, shipping companies, and manufacturers would face higher costs, potentially resulting in more expensive plane tickets, delayed deliveries, and pricier consumer goods. This isn't just hypothetical. In 2023, wildfires in Alberta temporarily shut down Canadian oil production, and within a week, U.S. gas prices spiked. Although the price increase was about 12%, the extent of the price hikes varied depending on location. And in some states, like Wisconsin, the issue was more about localized supply chain disruptions than an actual oil shortage. This event highlighted just how fragile the energy supply chain is, and how quickly disruptions can impact everyday life. The U.S. and Canada have been trade partners for over 150 years. But recent policies such as America First and Buy American have strained this relationship. In 2018, the U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and 10% on aluminum, citing national security concerns. In response, Canada retaliated with tariffs on $12.6 billion worth of U.S. goods, including bourbon, ketchup, and lawnmowers. While these tariffs were lifted in 2019, tensions over industrial policies remain high, especially as both countries strive to bolster domestic manufacturing. A prime example is the USS Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which offers tax credits. For electric vehicles made in the U.S., Canada argues that this excludes its automakers such as Ford and GM plants in Ontario that supply parts for U.S. assembled vehicles. This dispute has the potential to disrupt North American supply chains and complicate efforts to meet climate goals. The implications for businesses are significant. For example, a factory in Michigan using Canadian steel might face higher production costs, potentially leading to layoffs. Similarly, a Canadian farmer paying more for U.S.-made tractors might be forced to raise food prices to cover those additional costs. On social media, frustration with these trade disputes is palpable. Hashtags like #TradeWar and #CanadaUsFeud trend regularly, with small business owners sharing stories of the chaos caused by tariffs and disrupted supply chains. The U.S. and Canada aren't just neighbors, they're business partners with deeply integrated economies. Over $100 billion worth of auto parts cross the border each year, supporting more than 1 million jobs in both countries. Canada supplies 76% of the USS Cobalt imports, a critical component of electric vehicle batteries, and 14% of its uranium for nuclear energy. Canadian hydropower is also vital for U.S. states transitioning to renewable energy sources. Every year, the U.S. buys $25 billion worth of Canadian agricultural products, including wheat, pork, and maple syrup. In return, Canada imports over $20 billion in U.S. produce, like fruits and vegetables. This interdependence can create vulnerabilities. For example, in 2021, when a major freeze hit Texas, Canada increased its natural gas exports to help Americans stay warm. If political tensions continue to escalate, such cooperation could be threatened, leaving both countries exposed. Trade disputes and energy shortages don't remain in boardrooms. They eventually trickle down to the consumer. Higher energy bills could result from reduced Canadian electricity exports, with utilities passing the costs on to consumers. In 2022, a hydropower shortage contributed to higher electricity costs in New York, with estimates suggesting an additional $1.2 billion in costs, or around $100 per household. Gasoline prices could also rise sharply. A reduction in oil supply could push us gas prices to $5 per gallon, up from the current average of $3.50 for a family that drives 1,000 miles a month. That's an extra $50 to $75 per month in gas costs. Tariffs on steel could lead to higher prices for cars, appliances, and even soda cans. According to a 2023 study by the Peterson Institute, U.S.-Canada tariffs cost the average American household hundreds of dollars per year, reducing disposable income that might otherwise be spent on groceries, vacations, or savings. The question on everyone's mind is, could things get worse? While both Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and U.S. President Joe Biden have publicly emphasized their strong relationship, tensions continue to simmer beneath the surface. Two major issues could escalate the conflict even further. First, the Line 5 pipeline dispute in Michigan could potentially shut down Enbridge's pipeline, which transports 540,000 barrels of crude oil and natural gas liquids per day. This pipeline supplies refineries in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. If Michigan succeeds in shutting it down, over 11 million Americans could face propane shortages for home heating, and fuel prices could skyrocket due to reduced supply. The dispute is currently tied up in legal battles with both federal and state governments involved. The second flashpoint is the growing rivalry over electric vehicle EV battery supply chains. Canada has some of the world's largest untapped reserves of critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are essential for EV batteries. However, Canada has recently tightened restrictions on foreign investment in its mining sector, limiting U.S. access to these vital resources. This move aims to ensure that Canadian minerals benefit domestic industries first, but has angered U.S. automakers who depend on cross-border supply chains. This rivalry could delay the transition to clean energy and create bottlenecks in EV production. Just as both nations are aggressively pushing their climate goals, so what can be done to fix this growing mess? While tensions are rising, solutions do exist if both nations prioritize collaboration over confrontation. Expanding renewable energy partnerships is one possibility. Both Canada and the U.S. share an interest in reducing their reliance on fossil fuels and expanding clean energy infrastructure. Canada already exports 60 terawatt-hours of electricity to the U.S. annually, primarily from hydropower. If both nations can work together to strengthen these partnerships, the future could be one of shared prosperity, rather than continued conflict. Ultimately, the key to resolving these issues lies in finding common ground and ensuring that the partnership between the U.S. and Canada remains as strong as ever, despite the challenges that lie ahead.